Sarcopenia, in case someone's not familiar with that term, means loss of muscle mass.
Yes,
Correct.
yeah, exactly. It's essentially like dementia for your muscles. That's what I call it, because right, you're losing
I love
function and
that.
mass, and they're also connected, right? If you have sarcopenia, you have a higher risk of dementia, and vice
Yeah.
versa. One of my kind of pet peeves on social media is, here's a list of 37 things for brain health. I know that when you give somebody 37 things to do, they will do 0 things.
Welcome to the Brain Health Kitchen podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Annie Fenn. I am super excited to welcome Dr. Tommy Wood to today's episode. Dr. Wood is an expert in the field of neuroscientist and brain physiology. He's an assistant professor of pediatrics and neuroscience at the University of Washington, where his research focuses on brain health across lifespan, including factors that contribute to aging with a healthy brain. Dr. Wood has a diverse academic background that includes a bachelor's degree in biochemistry from the University of Cambridge, a medical degree from the University of Oxford, and a PhD in physiology and neuroscience from the University of Oslo. Dr. Wood has also worked as a performance consultant to elite athletes in numerous sports, including multiple Formula One drivers. Tommy co-hosts the Better Brain Fitness podcast on Substack, and he's the author of the new book, The Stimulated Mind: Future-Proof Your Brain from Dementia and Stay Sharp at Any Age, which is now available wherever books are sold. In today's episode, we'll get into how Tommy's unique background informs a novel perspective on dementia prevention. We'll talk about the link between exercise and brain health, his approach to nutrition and supplements, and how to improve short-term memory. Stay tuned to the end, where he ranks a long list of wellness trends for brain health on a scale of 1 to 10. I hope you enjoy our conversation. I am grateful to have two of the most trusted brands in brain health as founding sponsors of this podcast. First, we are proudly supported by NeuroReserve, a brain health nutrition company dedicated to bringing us high-quality, science-backed supplements, including Relevate, a brain-specific blend of omega-3 fatty acids, and Revanta, a pure-grade creatine. In fact, if I had to personally choose just 2 brain health supplements to take, it would be Relevate and Revanta. Learn more about their commitment to brain health at neuroreserve.com and use code BHKPodcast for 10% off. We are also proudly supported by Better Brain, the world's first brain health and dementia prevention program that's covered by insurance. They provide a brain health panel of over 50 markers, expert coaching, and a personalized action plan. Most people pay nothing out of pocket. Check it out at betterbrain.com/Annie. Dr. Tommy Wood. Can I call you Tommy?
Absolutely.
Awesome. I have to tell you that long before I was reading your Substack or following your Instagram account about all the brain health topics that you research and you talk about, I first got to know you in the papers that you've published.
Oh, wow.
In the literature. Your name kept popping up whenever I was doing literature searches, looking for topics to write about. So I feel like I've known you a long time, even though we've just really become acquainted. So welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a huge pleasure to be here. I'm a big fan of your work as well. And thanks for telling me about the papers, because as an academic, you can only hope that maybe a small handful of people will actually read the papers that you write. So I really appreciate that you found me that way.
Right. Well, your background is so interesting from a brain health perspective. And I just finished reading your book, which I am super excited about. So Tommy's book is called The Stimulated Mind: Future-Proof Your Brain from Dementia and Stay Sharp at Any Age. So first of all, I have to ask you, you've done so much in the field of brain health, from looking at newborns and children and how their brains develop, to looking at traumatic brain injury, to looking at like sports performance for Formula One drivers. How did you become interested in dementia prevention, and why did that become the topic of your first book?
Of all those things that you mentioned, the sort of cognitive decline and dementia prevention really was the most recent thing that I became interested in. And it's largely because of those other things that you mentioned. And they sound a little disparate, right? Newborn babies, traumatic brain injury, sports performance. But if I sort of zoom back a little bit in my own personal history, I came to sort of an interest in personal health and well-being in my sort of early 20s. And that was one of the reasons I went to medical school. In your medical school interview, when they're like, tell us why you want to be a doctor, I sort of talked about how I learned a bit about nutrition and exercise. And this is all sort of self-taught, just out of my own interest. And I wanted to help, other people, learn about those things. Of course, that's not what you really do as a doctor. Like, most doctors don't get to do that, not because they don't want to, just because the system's not set up that way.
Right.
But that was my original kind of motivation to go to medical school. And then I did a PhD and spent some time, like more and more time working with athletes. I started that in medical school, and then sort of started to do that professionally during my PhD and postdoc period. And essentially, I kept seeing the same ideas pop up again and again and again, like what's important for a developing brain, what's important for a brain recovering from injury, what's important for creating a baseline from which an athlete can perform at an elite level. And then, because we only get one brain and all those things are actually connected and sort of have to last an entire lifetime, that then naturally sort of extends into the period as an older adult and how our brains, what our brains need to function as well as possible for as long as possible. And that's really where I thought information about how people can take some agency in that process and ideally prevent it or at least slow it, that's where the biggest impact could be. And so that's why I wrote the book, because I think that's where people need it most and where we can have the biggest impact.
Amazing. And your background is uniquely tailored to looking at the aging brain and, slowing down age-related cognitive decline, going back to studying babies and athletes and everything. So I feel like your book brings such a unique perspective that's needed in this space. I'm really excited about it. Really excited about it.
I appreciate
One of
that.
the things one of the concepts in the book that you bring up is this concept of headroom. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about this. It's different than other ways people have described this.
So headroom is a concept that I stole or borrowed from an economist called Art Devaney, who actually passed very recently. And he was talking about this idea of evolutionary fitness, like what it takes to live a long, healthy life, sort of thinking about the inputs that our bodies require for high levels of function. And he was writing about this 30 plus years ago. And his idea of headroom was, what's the maximum capacity that I have available to me in terms of function? And you could think about that for any system in the body, right? The muscles, the heart, your different organs, including the brain. And so I've shaped this to this idea of cognitive headroom, which is, how much do I have available in terms of brain structure and brain function? Because these are buffers that we then have as the processes of aging and decline occur, because they will at some point. We can't prevent aging entirely. So we want to go into life with as much buffer as possible. And that's both in terms of brain volume and then the function of our brain. And in the scientific literature, you might hear terms like brain reserve or cognitive reserve. So brain reserve is essentially how much brain do you have? Because the more brain, the better. And as you start to lose brain volume, the more you had to start with, the better you can buffer against that decline.
Yes.
And cognitive reserve is essentially the same. How much function can you lose before it impacts your day-to-day life? And you might hear another term called resilience. So cognitive resilience is how well can you maintain function in the face of accumulating damage or pathology. So amyloid and tau and vascular disease in the brain. How well can you tolerate that buildup? Because you will get some. All of us will get some.
Yes. And
so I think then I combine these reserve and resilience into this idea of headroom, because many of the modifiable factors for dementia, or modifiable risk factors, exercise, diet, social connection, stress management, sleep, they build reserve and resilience. And so that then provides us this total idea of headroom, like how much capacity can we build in our brains? to sort of be this buffer against times when we're stressed or sleep deprived and we still want to perform well. And we can build that headroom at any time in our lives. Our brain still responds, expands capacity. It can still increase its volume and function even into our 60s, 70s, 80s if we provide the right environment. So it's something that we want to build whenever we have the opportunity to start working on it.
I love this concept of headroom because it's kind of like a recipe for cognitive resilience and reserve. It sort of brings in all of these. They're not just really concepts. They're proven tenets of, dementia prevention,
Yeah.
like you said. And headroom just kind of is a new way to think about it across the lifespan. Because what you're really talking about, what your background speaks to, is taking care of your brain across lifespan, which is something
Yeah.
I've become really interested in since I started teaching college. And I'm teaching to 20-somethings. And, I want to make it relevant to them. A 22-year-old's not concerned about getting Alzheimer's or dementia later in life. But they want to be sharp and have
Yeah.
optimal brain performance.
Exactly. And what I think is then useful is to know and acknowledge that the things that you can do to improve how sharp you are and how well you remember and learn and perform at school, those same things build headroom regardless of where you are in your life stages, right? So whatever they're doing now or can do now to improve how well their brain functions is going to translate into, some kind of benefit years down the line.
I love it. And I also love bringing in that whole idea of buffer, because I think we all understand what a buffer is. We can't just keep filling up our brains with, stimuli and lack of sleep and nutrient poor diets. And, we can't just keep, maintaining that level and expect to have headroom
Yeah,
towards midlife
exactly.
and the end of life. You just
Mhm.
can't. That starts early. That starts, with young adults and
Yeah,
earlier,
absolutely.
right? It
Mhm.
starts with children.
Yeah.
So I love this concept. I love how it gives me a new way to think about cognitive resilience. Can we talk a little bit about Alzheimer's disease? It's a big focus of mine, as you know. And I love the way you just describe it in your book in terms of amyloid being the rust that builds
Mm.
up. Can you just give us a quick take on that?
Yeah, sure. So whenever you start to research or talk about Alzheimer's disease, the nature of its discovery and the research that's been done over the past 120 years since Alzheimer first described it has been very much a focus on amyloid and then tau accumulation in the brain, which I'm sure people are going to be familiar with. But while those things are absolutely an important part of the process, they don't explain everything. And there are studies that suggest that, if you live into your sort of 70s, 80s, 90s, the majority of people will have significant accumulation of those proteins in the brain, even if they haven't lost cognitive function. And, there are other studies that show that, in a similar age range, maybe 30% of people with normal cognitive function have amyloid and tau in their brains that looks like they should have Alzheimer's disease, but they don't. This is why we had to develop the ideas of resilience, because some people are just
Exactly.
resilient to these
Yes. Remember the
pathologies.
nun study?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the nun study being the classic. And so the way I think about it is, as we use our brains, they're out in the world doing their thing, we will accumulate some damage, which is one of the theories of what aging is, right? We accumulate, different, oxidative stress and these other things that then might injure neurons. And amyloid seems to be a response to neuronal stress
Yes.
from a number of different, you know, insults, if you want to call them that, inflammation, oxidative stress, all that kind of stuff. And so this is the same as your car. And so I relate it to rust on your car. So if you have your car for long enough, your car is going to get rusty, right? But you can prevent some of that rust by looking after your car and having, taking it in for regular maintenance, over decades. But if we focus only on the rust, we might ignore other things that are important for car maintenance as well. Like there are many other reasons why your car can stop working, right? The fluid, the fluid lines in the pumps can fail. The tires can become misaligned, right? The electrics can sort of short out.
Yeah.
And so, yes, accumulating a lot of rust is probably going to be bad for your car. But there are other things that are important as well. And, if you have your car for long enough, you're going to generate some rust without it necessarily being fatal to the car's function. So it's a critical part of the aging brain. It's a critical part of the development of Alzheimer's. But I think it's important to kind of zoom out a little bit and make sure we're taking in the full picture as much as possible, because there are several things that decrease the risk of dementia without necessarily altering how much amyloid we have in our brains. So I think it kind of helps us give an idea of one critical process, but I don't want to lose the forest for the trees.
Yeah, I like that zoom out approach because so much is written and such the focus of research and pharmaceutical companies has been on amyloid.
Yeah.
And even, developing drugs to remove amyloid from the brain, having some promising results, but, mixed in later stages. So it's really important to zoom out and think of that as a whole. I love it. I love the car analogy. Uh, Although I live in a really cold climate, so it doesn't bode well for my car. So let's talk about one of the pillars of dementia prevention
Hmm.
that you have expertise in, which is exercise. Okay.
Yeah.
And when I was teaching college this year, the students were really into this concept of the muscle brain axis,
Yeah.
or the fact that we now know that there are things like myokines in the muscle that can actually pass the blood-brain barrier and have impact on our brain health. And I'd love to hear your take on that.
Sure. So I think more broadly, what we now know about physical activity and exercise is that it's probably the one thing that prevents or slows aging processes throughout the body more than anything else. There's no drug that works as well. There's no other activity that works as well to kind of prevent or slow these hallmarks of aging, we call them, the biochemical things you can measure that are part of the aging process, like changes in insulin sensitivity, mitochondrial function, inflammation, DNA damage, that kind of stuff. And we're, again, increasingly seeing over the last sort of, 10 to 20 years have really come to appreciate that the muscles are an endocrine organ, right? They release hormones and factors into the body that, when we activate and move them, that then improve the function of other organs and other parts of the body. And so this is the idea of myokines, and they actually fit into a broader picture of exokines, which are released by other organs as well. So the bones release exokines like osteocalcin when you kind of load the bones with, say, weight training, or the liver releases exokines, as does the pancreas.
Right. There's a bone-brain axis as well.
Yeah, exactly. And the way I kind of think about this is that when you move, you provide this critical signal to the muscles and the body that they are still useful, right? The body is constantly trying to match function to demand, right? So if you stop doing an activity, your body will decrease the function associated with that activity because it's not needed anymore. So one of the most critical inputs that we can give our bodies is exercise, and exokines are the way that this message is then spread throughout the body. So one of the sort of prototypical exokines or myokines is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF.
Yeah, I think most people probably have heard of this one, this BDNF, which has been described as miracle grow for the brain.
Yeah, and there are studies showing that in older adults, right, 40 minutes of brisk walking 3 times a week significantly increases BDNF production, significantly improves fitness, significantly improves hippocampal structure and memory function on cognitive function tests. And your BDNF is thought to be one of the sort of the key messengers that sends this message from the body that's walking up to the brain. Other things include like IL-6, so an inflammatory cytokine that gets released in spikes during exercise, but because of that actually decreases overall baseline levels of inflammation. It kind of resets the system.
Yes.
And there are other things like vascular endothelial growth factor that can improve blood vessel function, again, in the brain. When you do resistance training, you release things like IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1, which is really critical for the white matter of the brain. And that's one thing that I've seen across all those different areas I work in. It's really critical for the developing brain in newborn babies, and then really important for maintaining white matter structure which is a critical part of processing speed, executive function as individuals get older. So these are all the messengers that are kind of helping the brain maintain function because we're moving regularly.
I always say that strength training is mandatory if you want to age with a healthy brain.
Absolutely.
Absolutely mandatory because of all this like cool science that's coming out.
Yeah.
Plus, maintaining muscle mass helps people age with a healthier brain, especially if there's enough protein in the diet. So where do you come out on protein?
So again, there's been a lot of debate about protein recently, and for good reasons and bad reasons. But I tend to come out in favor of a higher protein intake. So in my book, I recommend 1.2 to 1.5 or 1.6 grams per kilo of body weight per day. This is sort of 50% more to double the recommended daily allowance. And there are a few reasons for this. The first is that often we hear that, say Americans already eat enough protein. On average, they eat like 1 to 1.2 grams per kilo per day. The issue with that partly is that while they're eating that much protein, the average American is in a calorie surplus. And over time, that energy excess we know is detrimental for the brain. We also know from studies done by people like Kevin Hall, and when he worked at the NIH, that particularly when you're eating a refined, low quality diet, people eat more calories in order to hit, or at least partly in order to hit a protein, set amount of protein. So in kind of the current food environment, people eat more low quality food in order to get enough protein. And because of that, they overeat calories. So if we create a focus on protein or we're trying to decrease overall energy intake because the average person will gain weight over time, which is not going to be beneficial for their brain, then I think we can offset some of that tendency to overconsume calories. When you then look in older populations, so there was a recent clinical trial where they had people who had type 2 diabetes and some evidence of sarcopenia. And they randomized them to two groups. One group ate at the recommended daily allowance. So it was, 0.35, 0.4 grams per pound of body weight per day. And then another group got sort of 50% to double that, 50% more to double that, kind of the range that I talk about in the book.
And sarcopenia, in case someone's not familiar with that term, means loss of muscle mass.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And this is it's essentially like dementia for your muscles. That's what I call it, because you're losing function and mass, and they were also connected, right? If you have sarcopenia, you have a higher risk of dementia, and vice versa. And so in this group, those who ate at the recommended daily allowance of protein intake, they lost muscle mass and function over time, whereas the group who ate a higher amount of protein, they maintained it and actually increased it. And there are, again, studies suggesting that higher protein intake is particularly important if people have low levels of physical activity, and it helps to maintain muscle mass and function in the setting of low physical activity. So one of the reasons why I really focus on protein in the book is because if you're trying to help as many people as possible, then increasing protein intake can help to offset some of the issues that we have when people are at high risk of losing muscle mass, or they're relatively sedentary, which is unfortunately quite common. So I think that's where people will get the most benefit. The other side of the conversation that is happening now, and understandably, is that, right, if we spend all our time focusing on protein, then we're not going to get enough fiber and other critical nutrients from the diet. Right. And that is absolutely true. I completely agree with that.
Getting enough protein in a brain healthy diet can be tricky, especially for those who lean more towards plant-based eating too.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is another reason why I focus on the protein, because if that's the first thing you put on your plate, but you're eating a high quality, nutrient dense diet, plant-rich diet, then I'm confident you're going to hit your fiber goals. Whereas as people get older, especially, often protein intake in particular tends to suffer. So I think it's very possible, and this is what I recommend, that people eat high protein and high fiber, high, nutrient rich, antioxidant rich plants and fruits, because we know those are critical for the brain as well. This is how I eat. And I think that's, if we could get everybody to eat like that, I think that would be fantastic. So I advocate for higher protein, but I don't think that should come at the expense of other nutrients and fiber rich foods in the diet.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable, and I totally, see eye to eye with you on that. When you talk about a brain healthy diet and the food groups that we know are neuroprotective, the issue of getting enough fiber doesn't become a problem anymore
Yeah,
because it's baked into this eating pattern.
exactly. Yeah.
The protein is what people need to pay a little bit more attention to, and it's
Hmm.
absolutely possible in plant-based diet to get adequate protein like you're
Oh,
talking about.
yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's absolutely possible. So let's go back to exercise for a minute. One of my favorite tables in your book has to do with your pantry of exercise snacks. This is the part of the book that I'm actually going to put on my computer screen. So when I'm at work, toiling away at my computer most of the day, I can check in and pick an exercise snack from the pantry. So you talked about how important it is to exercise and that it doesn't have to be like 2-hour long workouts. What is the benefit of snacking? And what are some examples?
Yeah. So in the book, I have this idea of the movement funnel, which looks a little bit like an upside down pyramid, but upside down pyramids have gotten a bad rap recently. So
Oh, yeah.
it's a funnel, and I have it as a funnel because a funnel is something you move through, and you can kind of like add as you go. But the entry point is what I call snack. This is important, again, just sort of conceptually, because like you said, people often assume that you have to do some amount of arduous exercise for it to be beneficial, when the all the data show that any movement you do more than what you're doing right now will be beneficial for the brain. And that can come in any form. You can then create a much more structured, multifaceted training program if you want. But the biggest benefit seems to come from people who are relatively sedentary to being just a bit less sedentary. And one of the most important parts of that is just not spending huge amounts of time sitting still. And there is some interesting data from like the UK Biobank where the risk of being sedentary and the increased risk of dementia due to being sedentary came largely because of very long periods of being sedentary during the day that weren't broken up. So to kind of like put some numbers on it. So imagine that you spend 10 hours a day sitting, might be 12 hours a day, right? At work and then at home afterwards. If you broke that up, the risk associated with that dramatically decreases. And it doesn't mean you have to go to like the gym for an hour. It just means stand up and walk around for a few minutes. Like
Yeah.
that's it. So, and
And
there
wasn't
are
there a
studies.
study in JAMA last year, or the year before, about just putting aside 5 minutes out of every hour
Mm,
to get up and move around? How to do
yeah.
an exercise snack or even just walk around the house?
Yes. Yeah,
That
exactly.
breaks up that prolonged sedentary pattern.
Yeah. And that's where probably some of the biggest gains are to be had, even for people who are active, go to the gym. There's both short-term benefits on cognitive function from, just moving around occasionally. And there are studies that show that, right? If you sit still for 2 or 3 hours, mood and blood flow to the brain and cognitive function decrease slightly, and you just offset that by getting up. One of the snacks they've studied in those kinds of studies is just 15 squats, right? So you stand up, sit down, like so your butt kind of hits the
Great one.
chair, but you don't kind of just like sit down in the chair. You do that 15 times. That's it. So then in the book, my pantry of exercise snacks has two different levels. So one is just changing the way that you sit, because when you look at sort of hunter-gatherer or more ancestral human groups, right, they sit a lot. But when they sit very differently from how we do. So they're using their body a lot more. So either they're squatting or they're kind of resting on the ground, or they constantly have to get up and move around because they're not just like semi-comatose on the couch, right? That's a very different. You're using no muscles in your body when you do that. So the first is just changing how you sit. Maybe you occasionally stand up, you have a standing desk, maybe you sit on a Swiss ball if you like, maybe you're squatting, maybe you're using other muscles while you sit, however is comfortable for you to do that. So that's like the first part. And then the second part is, maybe once an hour or every couple of hours, you get up and you do some kind of movement. And stairs are one of the best studied ones,
Oh, I love
taking,
stairs. Yeah.
yeah,
My
but like,
favorite workout when I travel is doing as many flights of stairs as I can.
exactly. I'm that like annoying guy when I'm in the airport, like always walking up the stairs rather than taking the escalator like everybody else. So like, I completely agree. But in individuals who otherwise don't do much exercise, just like 20 seconds of stair climbing a few times a week significantly improves cardiovascular function, right?
Wow.
So again, we think we need to do a lot, but we really don't. So stairs, squats, jumping jacks, dancing around, push-ups, any of that, just for 15 or 20 seconds,
And how do you recommend someone get out of this pattern of prolonged sitting? Would you have them set an alarm on their watch or a sticky note on their computer? What are some tools that people can use to access this and change behavior? Changing behavior can be difficult.
Absolutely. So there are a few things that you can do. And nowadays, there are obviously lots of wearables. Your Apple Watch will tell you to get up and move around. If you actually listen to it, that's probably enough, right? You know what you're going to do, and that's it. Then there can be other things like when you're doing periods of work, you put your phone somewhere else or in another room, right? So if you're then going to access your phone, you have to get up and you have to go and get it and do something else. The same for lunch breaks, right? Don't just have your lunch next to you, like have it somewhere else. You have to go and physically eat it somewhere else. When you're you know traveling in a place, or you're like at work. So I work in a lab at the University of Washington. We're on the 5th floor, right? Just commit to, when you're changing floors, take the stairs, right? And there are other things like when people are talking about this, like, so in London, where I used to work as a doctor, like, you get off the bus or you get off the London Underground, like a stop earlier, and then you walk the rest of the way. If you can do stuff like that, that's great. But I think just giving yourself some reason to just get up and move every hour or two, that's going to be enough, hopefully, to start moving the needle.
I love it. I love it. It's a simple thing that everybody can do, and it has impact on cardiovascular
Yeah.
health and brain health.
Yeah,
Amazing.
absolutely.
Yeah. So you have a lot about nutrition in the book. We've already
Mhm.
delved a little bit into that. And I don't know, I just kind of interested in what your normal eating pattern is, just you kind of you personally.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of, do you put off your first meal of the day? Do you see any advantage to that? Um, are you mostly plant-based? When
Mm.
you choose animal proteins, what are your favorite sources? Do you supplement with protein
Mm.
powder? We're going to get into some supplements later, but I just love to hear how you eat.
Yeah. So I feel like a lot of my eating is influenced by, has become influenced a little bit by my heritage. So I'm half Icelandic and spent a lot of time in Iceland. Like learn to my grandma taught me how to cook and all that kind of
Oh, I
stuff. And
love
so I've kind of,
Icelandic food.
yeah, and I think this is important to me as well, because it shows that there are like very brain healthy dietary patterns that are like local to where people are everywhere in the world, right? Sometimes we get very focused on one single dietary pattern as like the best pattern, but in reality, I think we can achieve that. The same principles. Minimally processed, ideally with a good amount of fiber and protein, and antioxidant polyphenols and all those good things that for the brain, omega-3 fatty acids, obviously, in pretty much any location, and you could do it local to that group. So most days, my breakfast, and I usually have breakfast. I usually wake up around 6 a.m. Breakfast is usually sort of around 8 or 9 a.m. I will tinker with my eating window depending on my like athletic goals. So I train for and compete in strongman. And when I'm trying to diet down for a competition because I compete in a weight class, I'll sort of narrow my eating window a little bit, but usually more at the end of the day. So I'll like stop eating by 6. And the main reason why I do that, and this has actually been shown in several studies, is that when you stop eating after dinner, you just stop snacking and consuming like the other sort of like additional treats and things that you don't really
Yeah.
need, but you kind of want. You
There's
know what
not
I
a
mean?
lot of good eating that happens after dinner.
No, exactly. So that's just like, that helps me give a buffer if I'm sort of trying to modify my body composition for a competition. But breakfast is usually a bowl of like protein, berry oatmeal. So I get some steel cut oats. I add a whole bunch of frozen berries. I do like wild blueberries in particular. They're like wild blueberries are my favorite. I think if there's one, like two brain superfoods that I would pick are wild blueberries and sardines. That
I
probably
totally
ticks.
agree with you.
Yeah.
I totally agree. Because the wild blueberries, because they're small, they have more of the flavonoids in the skin.
Yes,
Like the skin to
exactly.
flesh ratio is
Yeah.
optimal for human health.
And the flesh is much more anthocyanin enriched than like a traditional blueberry as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I buy them in like big frozen 5-pound bags from Costco. So it can actually can actually be like very economical. So like steel cut oats, couple of cups of frozen berries. Then I will add a couple of scoops of protein powder, usually kind of cook that up, maybe a bit of cinnamon. And then I'll usually have like some Greek type yogurt, or actually an Icelandic yogurt, skyr, which is something that I grew up eating, is now available over here, and some kefir. So like I'm getting like 20 or 30 grams of fiber, 40 grams of protein, probiotics from fermented dairy, all that kind of stuff.
Fermented dairy.
So that's usually my breakfast. Lunch is usually leftovers. So like every night, or 5 or 6 nights a week, I'll cook. It's usually some kind of protein, fish or meat. I'm not primarily plant-based, but I eat a variety of animal proteins. Not that and then also some plant-based proteins as well, beans and legumes, etc. But some kind of protein, and then usually maybe there's a whole food carb source, sweet potatoes, brown rice, something like that, and then two or three different types of vegetables or a big salad.
And when you do eat sardines, how do you like to eat them?
One of my favorite things to do is to make what I call sardine salad. So I take a tin of sardines, a hard-boiled egg, and then I kind of mash them up, and I add, again, a little bit of skyr, a squeeze of lemon juice, a little bit of mustard, and then I'll put that on whatever leftovers I've got. Leftover salad, leftover rice. That's a fairly so if I don't have leftover protein, usually I'll grab a couple of hard-boiled eggs and a can of sardines, and I'll kind of add that to whatever veggies I have left over from the fridge.
I love that. I have a similar recipe in my book for a sardine salad, and it's sardines from a tin, and it's sort of a Sicilian take on it. There's currants and capers, lemon juice, and olive oil, and then I put it in avocado halves. Like an old school, ladies who lunch kind of salad.
Yeah, yummy.
But I love what's coming out of your dietary choices is it's what I call fit. Like I have this concept of the 4 F's of brain healthy food: brain friendly fats, flavonoids, fiber, and the fourth one is fit. And that means it has to make sense for you. It has to make sense, and it's based on where you come from. It's based on what you cooked with your grandmother, if you were lucky enough to have that kind of a situation. Yeah. For me, I'm always trying to adapt my Sicilian roots to a brain healthy diet. Yeah. And it sounds like you're doing the same thing with your Icelandic roots.
Yeah,
and that's how it makes
exactly.
it makes it relevant for how you eat now.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was putting together like the pre-order pack for my book, I put together a couple of recipes, and the ones that I put together were my sort of morning oatmeal and my sardine salad. And then I kind of hadn't really thought about it, but then I was like, I'm eating more and more like the foods I grew up eating, which, for a big part of my life were kind of anchored in more Nordic and Icelandic cuisine. So yeah, I kind of really enjoyed realizing that.
Tommy, I need to put my dog out.
Okay.
I don't know if you heard the yell thing. Livy, she usually sleeps through these things. And I want to, can we do that part again? Because I really love what you just said.
Of course, yeah.
Livy, do you want to go outside? Come on. She's a German warrior herd pointer, and she's super active. All right, come on, babe. Come on. Okay.
This time in the morning, my dogs are usually snoozing. So I've got one kind of on a couch here, and then another one is on the couch upstairs. So
yeah, it's like when I had small children, it's like it's nap time. And she's having ACL surgery, so I'm trying to wrap my brain around that, getting work done while she's recovering.
Our dog just had that. So he had a partial tear of his ACL and had to have like the full like a full reconstruction, like the tibial
Oh,
plateau
yeah?
leveling.
How
Is
did
that the
it
surgery that
go?
she's having? Um, it was fine. He was like, at the time, he was like just over 3 years old. He's super active and just like super goofy.
Yeah.
And he was not happy about it. He was like created for we like had to move our entire life like down to our big sort of open living space downstairs, so he didn't have to move around. Like
Right.
crazing him at night, nobody slept because he complained the whole time. I wrote like half of my book just sat either on the floor or the couch, like just holding him next to me so he wouldn't
Oh.
move and like do damage to his knee. So it's fine now. He's
Yeah.
great, but it was 16 weeks
Oh
of
my goodness.
of
So my
like,
Libby's having TPLO, and it's an
yeah,
8-week
yeah,
course. Is it the same thing?
it was the same thing. But so he was allowed to be off leash after 8 weeks, but there was a very gradual increase in like the amount of activity that he could do.
Yeah.
So like the first 8 weeks were tough. The second 8 weeks were not so bad. But yeah, so it's the same surgery. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how, I'll get my work done. Anyways, we were talking about how as you get older, it seems like you lean more towards these Icelandic roots in your food choices, right?
Yeah. So when I was preparing the pre-order stuff for my book, like a little pre-order goodie pack, I put together a couple of recipes, and the two recipes that I picked were this, like my morning oatmeal and my sardine salad. And as I was kind of, writing a little bit of background about the recipes, I realized that I had over time increasingly eaten more and more like, some of these foods that I ate in Iceland with my grandmother, and I sort of like gravitated towards that. So it's kind of, I hadn't realized it, but it was nice to realize that, and I think that's an important thing that we can kind of lean into again, so that it kind of fits with what feels good for us and is sustainable.
Yeah, and diets have to be a good fit, otherwise they're not
Mhm.
sustainable. And
Yeah,
there's so much talk
absolutely.
of the Mediterranean diet, which is most studied, and a lot of
Mm.
our brain health, brain protective dietary patterns are based on. But you don't
Yeah.
have to eat like you're a person from a Mediterranean country. It could be, Iceland, it could be Latin
Mm.
America, it could be Africa, and it could be any different type of culture that has like the same types of neuroprotective foods. So
Yeah,
I love
absolutely.
that. I love that. It's super refreshing. Um, so I thought it would be fun to get into some wellness trends because I know you're very well versed in this and just
Okay.
kind of rank them from 1 to
Yeah.
10. But
All
before
right.
we do that, I don't want to leave the book without having you tell us about the 3S model. It's sort of your beginner's guide to
Yeah.
building this headspace, to preventing dementia, to slowing down age-related cognitive decline. Can you share what the 3S model is?
Sure. So over the past kind of decade and a half, um, I've spent some time learning some techniques that they use in engineering to kind of understand how to solve complex problems, and I've kind of adapted them to a more simplistic mind like mine to kind of figure out how to make things kind of practical. This was kind of the process that created the 3S model, and I describe a fuller version of that process in the book. But when I think about all the different things that are important for brain health, right? We've talked about several. You could talk about dozens more.
Yes.
It becomes this very overwhelming list of things to do. And, one of my kind of pet peeves on social media is, here's a list of 37 things for brain health. And they're all like evidence based and, very reasonable, of course. But I know, I've worked with athletes and just like average people and patients. I know that when you give somebody 37 things to do, they will do zero things. Um, and so
It's overwhelming.
it
It's
is
too much information.
exactly. So when I was looking at all these different factors, I think they kind of coalesce into three groups that have similar mechanisms of action and that interact with one another, which means that even just one node in that network that I'll describe in a second, if you just make one change in that node, like the whole network shifts. So it kind of says that you don't need to do 37 things. You could do one thing and actually lots of things change with it. So the three S's are stimulus, supply, and support. So stimulus, the book is called The Stimulated Mind.
Stimulated mind.
I think the primary determinant of how our brains function is how we use them. So that's the stimulus that is applied to them. And, as a meathead, kind of relate this to how our muscles work if we work in the gym, right? If you want to get bigger and stronger, the most important thing to do is to lift weights, right? You need to apply a stimulus to your muscles. It's the same for cardiovascular exercise, right? And if you want to get fitter. So you can improve your ability to adapt to that stimulus, right? You can get a better response to your training if you have good nutrition, good physical health, if you sleep and recover properly, right? Those are really important. But if I want bigger biceps, I have to do bicep curls. That's like rule number one. I can't nap and protein shake my way into bigger muscles without the stimulus.
Gotta do the work. Yes.
You got to do the work. And the brain is the same, right? So this is learning complex skills, education, social interaction, complex coordinative physical movement, just being engaged with the world and learning new things, right? This is what drives the brain to improve its function. So that's the stimulus bucket. Then if you stimulate a part of the brain with learning a new skill, say a new language, that part of the brain becomes more active, and then it asks the blood vessels to bring in more blood, right? Those blood vessels, dilate, they widen, bring in more blood and oxygen. There's a process called neurovascular coupling. So you need good cardiovascular health, right? Heart health, right? That's critical.
Mm-hmm.
Then you also, blood flow to the brain. Then you need a good, what we call metabolic health, right? So that you're delivering glucose, properly, which becomes impaired in things like prediabetes and diabetes. And then you need the nutrients that kind of build and run that whole system, many of which we've already talked about. Omega-3s, vitamin D, polyphenol antioxidants. So that's my supply bucket. And then you've stimulated a part of the brain, you've brought in the nutrients and the energy that it needs to do the thing. And then for it to adapt and improve its function, it needs to recover. So sleep is critical. That's like the main part of the support bucket. But there are other things that kind of help to support the brain to adapt to stimulus. So one is those neurotrophic factors we mentioned earlier. Hormones can play a role there as well. And then we want to avoid things that can inhibit that adaptation process, like excess alcohol, smoking, air pollution, chronic stress. It can they impair the brain's ability to recover and adapt. So those are the three buckets. And we know that if you start to change one thing in one bucket, the other buckets change as well. So if you increase cognitive stimulus, you sleep better, right? There are randomized controlled trials that show that. And if you sleep better, then your blood pressure improves and your blood sugar improves and you feel more social the next day. And exercise is the same, right? If you exercise more, you sleep better and the whole thing shifts. If you stop smoking, inflammation improves, blood pressure improves, you're more likely to make beneficial dietary changes. So all these different nodes kind of directly influence one another. So that means you pick a bucket. Which bucket feels like something you could make some movement on?
So
pick
people
one
just
thing
need
within.
to choose a point to get in to
Exactly.
the system.
Yeah, exactly.
Choose your inflection point. Choose
Exactly.
where you want to access this. And then the ripple effect goes out to all the other points as well. That's exactly like engineering.
Yeah.
It is an engineering concept.
My wife is an engineer. So that's probably where I get some of it.
So she has influence in the book too. I love it.
Yeah.
I love that. And people need simple models and easy things that they can do right away to access brain health. What you and I have been talking about for years is just how to find a way in.
Yeah.
And then once you start, it's sort of like once you start to eat more nutrient-dense foods, then you want to exercise more. And once you start to exercise more, you want to eat more nutrient-dense foods.
Yeah, exactly.
And prioritize your sleep. So it's all related. I love that. I love that. Before we get to our wellness trends, thoughts on memory and, how everyone seems to feel like they have an impaired memory these days. You go into allostatic load, which is basically like we've got so much stimuli coming in. Like stimuli is good.
Yeah.
They are good, but too much can tip it over the edge into overwhelming the brain, correct?
Yeah.
So a few thoughts on memory.
Yeah. So the title of the book wasn't chosen by me. It was chosen by my editor, but I ended up quite liking it because it's a little, it's not controversial, but I think it will make people think, because at the same time in the modern world, we are both understimulated and overstimulated, right?
Right.
So we're understimulated in terms of those beneficial stimuli I mentioned earlier, new skill learning, social connection, things like that. But we're overstimulated in terms of just like this constant barrage of things that we're either doing at work, multitasking, task switching, watching TV while scrolling on our phones on Instagram. Like there's just this constant barrage of stuff that we're exposing our brains to, but we're never taking a true break to allow them to recover so that they can adapt and their function can improve.
We ask a
So
lot of our brains these days, and that's a
yeah,
modern phenomenon, I take it?
yes. So
Yeah.
if you think about, there have been some estimations of how much information our brains are processing compared to 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago, and it's like several orders of magnitude, like hundreds or thousands of times
Wow.
more. And I didn't put an estimate in the book because I was like, by the time the book is written, it's going to be out of date, because this is it just
Right.
keeps increasing. So a lot of the modern stimuli that we get can be beneficial, right? Learning new technologies. There's some interesting data on like video games, especially in older adults, improving the cognitive function because it's like this brand new complex stimulus that the brain's exposed to. But in order to benefit from those, we need to decrease like the total amount of time that we're being exposed to stuff. So we need to spend more time like deeply focused and paying attention, and then actually give our brain a break. And that can again just be like little snacks during the day, right? Go outside for a few minutes, just like completely disconnect, some breath work, some mindfulness. Even just like if you're working all day and doing multiple things at a time, there are studies that show that just like 5 minutes of watching comedy clips on YouTube is enough to kind of help you reset and go back into it. So we need to give ourselves those breaks during the day, because what happens otherwise, and this is why I think people feel like their memory is suffering, is we get less good at truly paying attention and focusing to one thing. As we multitask and task switch between multiple things, that is inherently stressful. There are studies that show that. But it also makes us more distractible. And we get to a point where we distract ourselves. If we're not getting a new input from our phone, we'll go looking for something because we just get so used to this pattern of constantly switching between things. And so then we're less able to remember stuff, not because we're in the sort of like early stages of dementia necessarily, but because we're just not paying attention. One of the most important things to drive memory and coding and then consolidation is focus and attention. And so when you're distracted or you're doing multiple things, your brain just isn't gonna process that. It's just gonna ignore it. So I think it's just this constant exposure to multiple different types of information constantly, which we never give ourselves a break from, that means that we're spending less time truly paying attention to things. And as a result, we feel like our memory is less good. But actually, we can train our attention. We can train our memory. There are studies that show that, doing mindfulness exercises, for instance, can improve some aspects of memory just because we get better at paying attention to things, right? Mindfulness is usually just a practice of paying attention. And so we can train that back up.
And I
But we
think
just
it's so
have to,
true what you said. We like to pride ourselves on being able to multitask, especially women,
yeah,
you know, have been shown to multitask, maybe more efficiently than men anyways, but it's not good for our brains.
hmm,
And, the short-term memory loss a lot of people complain to me about, or to you about, is more of an attention problem.
yeah,
And,
exactly.
we've trained our brains to look for this distraction.
Hmm.
So I
That's
love what you
exactly
said.
it.
When the distraction's not even there, our brains go looking for it because it's a
Yeah,
pattern
yeah.
the
So
brain's looking
if
for.
if people are interested in this, and a lot of this is described in a book by Gloria Mark called Attention Span. She's a psychologist whose work kind of really specializes in this. So it's a very good
Oh,
book
good
that
to
kind of
know.
describes all of
Good to know.
this. Yeah.
Good to know. Well, I hope everyone will go out and get your book, The Stimulated Mind. I highly recommend it. It's
Thank you.
fun to read. You make the science really fun, which I know is difficult to do. There's so many perks in there, like, little things you can do, things you can put on your computer screen or a sticky note for
Mm.
reminders to really get on board with this whole concept of taking care of your brain across lifespan. You're never too early to start, you're never too late. And there's a lot that we know that we can do to prevent age related cognitive decline.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we have a lot of great science here.
Mhm.
Okay. So I don't know if it's a pet peeve of yours, but I see a lot of wellness trends. We're both very science based,
Mhm.
right? And so I would just love for you to rate on a scale of 1 to 10 or 0 to 10 what you think about certain things that have been popping up all over in terms of being good for the brain. You
Okay.
ready?
Can I, because like the scientist in me can I give like one sentence of context after each number?
Yes,
Because I think
please
that's
do.
that's going to be really important for me.
Please do. I know it's really hard to just be black and white. I know. I get it. It's a scale, one,
All
0
right.
to,
Yeah.
okay. First one, sauna.
Um, 6 out of 10. I think some promising, interesting data. A number of reasons why it could be good for the brain, but probably a little bit oversold.
Awesome. Cold plunging.
Um, I'm going to say 3 out of 10 for long-term brain health, 7 out of 10 for immediate changes in mood and cognition, which there are some, but it doesn't need to be freezing cold. The best evidence is like 20 degrees Celsius for like 5 minutes to give an immediate boost in mood and focus. So doesn't need to be like chisel the ice off the water cold. Actually, just like a little bit cold is fine.
Oh,
Sorry,
I'm
that
so
was
happy
more.
to know that because I
Yeah,
like the less cold plunge at my
yeah,
gym.
and actually, better evidence for the less cold plunge.
Okay, love that. Magnesium,
7 out of 10 may improve sleep. Most people don't get enough magnesium.
especially women.
Yeah.
Totally agree. Okay, here's one. NAD plus.
0 out of 10.
Agree.
The especially when given as like IVs and stuff, they just don't work. No evidence for them whatsoever. NAD as a like molecule, very, very important. But all the other lifestyle factors we already talked about help you maintain and recycle NAD much more than taking a supplement.
Yeah, I just looked at all the research on NAD as a supplement and it broke my brain to read through all the papers. And there's so many of them and they come up with nothing. So
Yeah.
I hope people aren't wasting their money. Okay, creatine.
Um, Again, I'm going to say 6 out of 10. Out of all the possible supplements, creatine is the one that I would recommend after all the vitamins. Like make it like vitamin status, like supplementing to maintain adequate vitamin status, most important when it comes to supplements. Creatine, very low risk, potential for benefit for the brain, mood, even bone health in postmenopausal women doing resistance training. You need to do the work though. Creatine is not magic on its own.
Agree. It's a nice to have.
Yeah.
Not a have to
Yeah,
have like B
exactly.
vitamin.
Yeah.
What about methylene blue?
So, I'm gonna like 3 out of 10.
Okay.
So it's an interesting compound. There is almost no good evidence in humans. There's except for very high doses in individuals acutely exposed to hypoxia, which can negatively impact cognitive function. There are some interesting reports that it may help some individuals who have aspects of mitochondrial function, but equally, it can impair cognitive function in those who don't have those issues. I've tried it. Like, my brain stops working when I take it. So, not.
Wow.
And most sources of methylene blue, you like buy it on Amazon or whatever. Who knows what's in that? I would absolutely not take that.
So people should be very cautious.
Yeah, yeah.
Know what they're doing.
Maybe I'd even downgrade a little bit, like 1.5.
Okay. 1.5.
Yeah.
Got it. What about B vitamins?
If you can measure your B vitamin levels, and or your homocysteine is elevated, like above sort of like 10 or 11, like 10 out of 10, 14 out of 10, like really,
very strong.
yeah, very, very, very strong. Yeah.
Yeah. What about vitamin D?
Yeah, similar. If your vitamin D level is below 30, I would absolutely supplement. Strong connection to increased dementia risk in those, especially if it's below 20. But I think below 30 is an important target. Yeah. So most people will get most of the way with about 2,000 units of vitamin D a day. You might need more than that, but it's best to test if you can, because it's a fat soluble vitamin and you don't want to take too much.
So along those lines, omega-3s as a supplement.
So again, there's very interesting data showing that homocysteine, B vitamins, and omega-3 status interact, right? So both need to be good in order to benefit. So if you're not regularly consuming long-chain omega-3 fatty acids through seafood, then I would make an omega-3 supplement like 10 out of 10. Very important.
And people can check their levels too, right?
Yes.
They don't have to guess.
Yeah. So you can do the best one is probably the Omega Quant.
Mm-hmm.
You can even do that at home. You want to be at least above 6%. You'll be 8% or more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then the poor man's omega-3 test is like, how long do you bleed after you have a cut? The bleeding time.
Do you have a range? Do you have like a protocol that you can give people? Cut yourself and see how long it takes to.
Personal observation. Okay, moving away from vitamins. What about red light therapy?
Yeah, I'm going to put that maybe 5 out of 10 right now. Some really interesting data on concussion recovery, potentially even maintaining brain health. In a football season, there was a paper that just came out. Actually, was near infrared light rather than red light therapy. Some interesting data on wound healing, but right now we still don't necessarily know exactly the frequency, exactly which part of the brain, exactly which device. Right, so but very promising, but still needs a bit more research.
Good to know. Weighted vests.
Yeah, I would say again, sort of like maybe 4 out of 10. Not necessary for most people, but can be a nice way to sort of like add a little bit of resistance and intensity to like going for a walk or something like that. So if walking is your primary mode of exercise, you want to add a bit of intensity to it. A weighted vest is great. And so I do that. A lot of my cardio is walking, wearing a weighted vest, just because it adds some intensity to walking. So not necessary, but can be helpful.
Mm-hmm. And I usually have a backpack that's pretty weighted down. That would maybe be so same thing.
Yeah, rucking. You can.
I'm always carrying a heavy pack. I don't know why, but I just am. Yeah. So hopefully I have that built in. And then something that I only recently heard of called the personal curriculum. What is that?
Yeah, this is this new thing that I recently learned about too, where people basically just adults decide on some group of things or single thing that they want to learn and get better at, and based on their own sort of interests. And I like 10 out of 10. This is like absolutely the best thing for like cognitive stimulus. So like that process of thinking about something you want to learn, engaging in that process, getting better at it, failing at it, that kind of engagement. Great. Love it.
Yeah. Like a focus on something you want to learn.
Yeah, exactly.
That's done in community.
Yeah. Ideally a lot of that, classes or groups or whatever. Those things are fantastic.
Yeah. Like some of my friends are learning how to play bridge.
Oh,
I don't have time right now, but maybe someday. It seems really hard to me. And the last one is color hunting. Yeah,
this is a new one to me as well. But basically, the color hunting is this idea that you like go out into the world, and maybe you can do it as like a competition with a friend. I've seen examples of that. And you have a color, and then you have to take photos and fill like a grid or like collect photos with this specific color. And I think this is great. Like it's like a mindfulness exercise, but like mindfulness as in just like noticing. Like, so examples of it that I've seen are people out in the world collecting this color, like with photos, but it requires you to pay attention, to actually, notice the world around you. And I think that, and focus on it. And I think that's really great. Like 8, 9 out of 10. I love it.
So that may be something a person could do during a brain break.
Yeah.
You walk away from your computer, you go outside instead of just, spacing out. Then you can have your brain look for different things, like different pattern, different colors.
Yeah, exactly.
All the different greens in your front yard. I like that.
Yeah.
So
I think
like
it's fun.
thinking like an artist too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, these are great. Any more you want to add?
No, I think that's it. I think that's a good list.
Robust list.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing that we should probably come back to is there's a core list of vitamins
Hmm.
that are important for brain health. So these are
Yeah.
the need to haves.
Hmm.
You mentioned V vitamins, you mentioned vitamin D, you mentioned getting antioxidants like flavonoids through food, omega-3 fatty acids, the long chain fatty acids you get from fish and seafood or algae. And
Hmm.
then there's the nice to have,
Hmm.
like the creatine
Yeah.
and the protein powder.
And yeah, you might include like choline is certainly up there.
Yes, choline.
Which you can take as citicoline or CDP choline has some nice evidence for it in individuals who already have some cognitive impairment and also in individuals who've had a traumatic brain injury. But equally, you can get choline and related compounds from eggs, whole grains, organ meats like liver. So don't need to supplement if you're eating that kind of nutrient dense diet that we were talking about earlier.
Well, I love how your model of brain health across lifespans really kind of stretched the way I think about it. I love
Mm.
the funnel concept. I love the exercise snacks. I love everything about your book.
I
And
really appreciate it. Thank you.
there's like a lifetime of work that's gone into it with all the facets of health that you've
Mhm.
had your fingers in over the years as a pediatrician, as a neuroscientist, um, as a exercise physiology coach. I
Mhm.
mean, it's a unique look at aging with a healthy brain. So I hope everyone picks up a copy of your book, The Stimulated Mind, and we're doing a giveaway, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so this episode will come out when the book is available, and so look on Instagram, look on our Substacks, and will you tell us about your Substack real quick so people can find you there?
Yeah. So I have a Substack called Better Brain Fitness that I share with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Josh Turknett, who's a neurologist. And we've written some papers together, and we have a podcast. The main sort of outlet on the Substack is our podcast. And you can sign up, and you can sign up for the free version. Everything that we do is on the free version, and it's a Q&A type podcast. So you can submit questions, and then we answer one question every week. So if you have any additional questions about anything we talked about today, anything else, anything in the book, please come there and we'll try and answer those.
And it's so fun to watch you and listen to you and Josh grapple really difficult topics too. A lot of times I'll be reading a paper in the scientific literature, and then it'll come up on your Better Brain Fitness podcast. I was like, great, I get to hear what these guys think about it. So it's
Yeah,
it's
it's a lot of
super
fun.
fun, it's super valuable. I hope everyone goes over there and signs up. And you're also on Instagram, correct?
Yes, at Dr. Tommy Wood on Instagram, Dr. Tommy Wood. My website is drtommywood.com. And you can also find the book. So the book is there, but you can also go to thestimulatedmind.com, and all of that, all of the information will be there. Once if you have a copy of the book, and you're interested in the science, I had so many references in my book that my publisher refused to put them in the book because it was going to like add 150 pages or something. So all the
Wow.
references will be easy to find. Because I'll do the little numbers to kind of tell us, like there's a paper, you go to my website, all the papers are there. There's going to be about 2,000 of them. But for anybody who's like into the science, like
Science nerds like me.
yeah. So you, Anna, I think you will
I will
like the list
definitely
of
be
references
checking
you
out
can
the
go dive into.
references.
Yeah.
Thank you. So thanks, Tommy. Thanks for joining me. It's been a real pleasure to learn more about your work and go through all our wellness trends. I think we had a nice robust list there. And I can't wait for everyone to get this book and read and just learn more from you. So thank you so much. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, and thank you. This was absolutely fabulous. Really enjoyed it, and I'm really glad that you enjoyed the book.
Okay, well, we'll talk soon.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.
Annie, I really enjoyed your conversation with Tommy Wood.
Wasn't that great? I loved
Yeah.
all the little nuggets he shared from his new book. So tell me, what are your big takeaways, Jenny?
Yeah. So one of the big themes I heard is that brain health is driven by metabolic health. So what's happening with insulin resistance and energy use in the body is also happening in the brain, often long before we see symptoms. Another key takeaway I got was that cognitive decline doesn't start when memory problems show up. It actually begins decades earlier, which means the choices we make in midlife or even earlier are really important. Tommy talked about how powerful exercise is for the brain. It's not just for fitness. It's improving blood flow, supporting brain metabolism, and building resilience over time. He emphasized that muscle mass plays a really important role here. Maintaining strength isn't just about physical function as we age, which we know is important. Strength is tied to how well we regulate blood sugar and support overall brain health. Tommy talked about how important sleep is, that sleep is a non-negotiable in your health. And deep sleep is when the brain clears waste and consolidates memory. So poor sleep over time can directly impact long-term brain function. When it comes to diet, it's less about perfection and more about patterns. Consistency with whole, nutrient-dense foods matter far more than any single superfood or short-term change. And finally, one of the most encouraging takeaways I got was that the brain is incredibly adaptable. Even small, consistent changes can improve function and reduce risk over time.
Yeah, those are great takeaways. There was so much information that he shared with us, and I think you hit on the key ones. So what do we do with this information? What are our action items? What's our to-do list?
Yeah.
Well, one thing I would say is that anchor your day with movement. Aim for daily activity and include both cardio and strength training each week.
Yeah.
And I also say prioritize strength to support metabolic health. Lift weights or do resistance training at least 2 to 3 times a week to maintain muscle mass. And then when it comes back to metabolic health, support stable blood sugar throughout the day. Build meals with protein, healthy fats, and fiber, and avoid large spikes from ultra-processed foods. And then using simple routines to improve sleep quality is a really key action item. Keeping a consistent sleep and wake time schedule and limiting alcohol before bed, especially, and getting morning sunlight. And I love his approach to eating for brain health, especially dementia prevention. It's all about dietary patterns. It's not about perfection. Center your diet around whole foods like vegetables, legumes, fish, olive oil, whole grains, foods that you really like.
Yeah, and we touched on that quite a bit in episode 1, if people want to learn more about that.
Exactly. And then another thing I really love about Tommy's approach is his pantry of exercise snacks.
Yeah.
And adding movement snacks to your day can be a really powerful impact on your health. So short walks after meals, brief activity breaks, anything you can do to really like break up sitting. Prolonged sitting is what we want to avoid the most. And then just the overall message that, small changes that you can sustain are most important. Consistency over time is what drives brain health, not extreme or short-term efforts.
Yeah, I think that is a terrific to-do list. Doable, too.
And doable. Yeah, it's a doable to-do list. I love that. And my last action item is for everyone to get a copy of Dr. Tommy Wood's new book, The Stimulated Mind. Future-proof your brain. And how does it go, Jenny?
Future-proof your brain from dementia and stay sharp at any age. It's terrific.
It's terrific. It's in bookstores or everywhere you can buy books. We are giving away a copy of Dr. Wood's book, The Stimulated Mind, on Substack this week. So check out your bonus materials, paid subscribers to Brain Health Kitchen Substack, and you can enter to win a copy of Tommy's book. And stay tuned. We'll also be giving another copy away on Instagram the week after this airs. A big thank you to Dr. Tommy Wood for joining us today on the Brain Health Kitchen podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone you love, and be sure to hit the follow and subscribe button so you never miss an episode. For more information on how to take care of your brain, join me at brainhealthkitchen.substack.com. If you listen to this podcast, you already care deeply about your brain health. That's not the problem. The problem is figuring out what to do next for your brain, for your body, your specific biology. That's exactly what Better Brain does. They test over 50 markers across 10 body systems, and a coach sits down with you for close to an hour and builds a plan you'll actually follow. I went through it myself and found things I'd completely missed. And that's when I knew I wanted them as a partner for this show. They offer a science-backed brain health lab panel and expert coaching to build your personalized action plan covered by insurance. Most people pay $0 out of pocket for these sessions. Check it out at betterbrain.com/Annie. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. And a big thank you to NeuroReserve for being a founding sponsor to this podcast and for building the tools that actually match the science when it comes to brain health. If you're ready to move from knowing to doing, check out their nutritional products, Relevate, Brain Health Kitchen Extra Virgin Olive Oil, and Revanta Creatine. They're all a great place to start. I've known the NeuroReserve team for many years, and I also use their products as part of my own brain health routine. Go over to neuroreserve.com and use code BHK podcast for 10% off. The Brain Health Kitchen podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. The content shared on this podcast, including conversations with guests, is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Brain Health Kitchen podcast or its hosts.